Hey folks, it's Nate. It's time I got back to the drawing board, and today I want to talk a little bit about manga in theory and practice, the craft of creating manga by Hirohiko Araki. If you don't know who Hirohiko Araki is, he's the creator of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which is a really great long-running adventure manga from Japan, of course. Um, and he is, to the best of my knowledge, the only person working in comics or manga or any kind of sequential art form that has managed to get his sequential art in the Louvre in Paris. It's a pretty big deal. He's a good artist, although um, he definitely has his own peculiarities. Let's put it that way. He's a good storyteller, and he's definitely improved a lot over the years. And he wrote this book. I didn't check. When did he write this book? Um, it's been within the last decade that he wrote this book because first published in Japan in 2015. So he wrote this book about 5 years ago, let's call it, because it was probably not written the same year it was published. To kind of help people figure out the art of creating a manga, a story. Visual storytelling is hard, and any kind of creative work is hard. And he kind of wrote this book to help people along. And I'm going to look today at the introduction in chapter 1 and just share some of my thoughts that I came away with after reading it. Now, I highly recommend reading this book. I haven't finished it. I just got it yesterday, but I'm about halfway through chapter 3, and I can already tell there's tons of great stuff in here from a person who really knows his craft. So yeah, definitely pick it up and read it right out of the bat. If you take nothing else away from this, if you hit stop right now, you should know that I would really recommend reading this because it's just a great book from someone who knows his craft with a lot of very practical, useful advice. He's not going to tell you to go navel gazing and discover yourself and then express yourself on a page. This is not that new agey express yourself kind of BS that you might be thinking of on a book about art. This is really practical stuff, and he says it right here in the beginning why I am writing this book. My goal in writing this book is to guide you down the royal road to creating manga, or to put it more simply, this is a how-to book. It's a manga how-to book, he says, but he hopes that people in any kind of storytelling area will be able to get something from this. He talks a lot about the royal road or the golden way, and he kind of likens it to climbing a mountain. And this book is kind of a map. It helps you understand the terrain of the mountain, the obstacles you will face, and how people have overcome them already. He's not saying you have to do it this way, but he is saying, done it for a long time, and this is the advice I had when I started. This is how I applied it, and this is what I came away thinking about it. And that kind of advice is just really fantastic for people who are trying to do anything. Even creative endeavors. You are not by any means straitjacketed by the kind of advice he gives you. In fact, his advice is very open-ended by and large, what I've read so far. This is not artistic tips on how to draw or anything like that, although he does bring up some of that. This is more about training your mind to think creatively, to break out of its boxes and really come at problems in different ways, and also recognize what the problems you are going to face are in writing comics or drawing manga. Now, not all of these apply in quite the same way. He talks frequently about the editors he's dealt with in the manga industry, and editors in manga are very much gatekeepers. They are probably more so a gatekeeper than even editors in American comics. And if you are publishing American comics, you will face that to some extent. If you're publishing independently, which is what I hope to do, you will not face that as much. Of course, you will also not get all the benefits of having that editor there, but 6 of one, half a dozen of another. So the introduction is just him kind of laying out his argument for why he made this book, why he thinks it's important that he make this book. Asian cultures are very conservative, by which I mean they like to preserve what already exists. And one of the responsibilities of experienced people in conservative cultures is they just need to take everything they've learned and they need to find a way to pass it down. And in China and in Japan, where they have big written word cultures, that typically meant writing everything down. You didn't, pass it down verbally. You made a book, and you can see that. Everybody wrote a book. Sun Tzu wrote a book. Most of the Chinese emperors wrote books, or rather, they dictated books to scribes. Even Bruce Lee wrote a book. Of course, most of his ideas weren't original. They were ideas he had learned from other martial arts masters and other martial arts tomes. But the idea of copyright in the East is very much different from what it is in the West. They don't think of that kind of knowledge as proprietary to quite the extent we do. Rather, they think of it as something that the experienced and the wise have a moral obligation to share. So when Bruce Lee wrote his book, and half of it was stuff he had extracted from other martial arts masters, he wasn't plagiarizing so much as he was he felt probably, it would be his perspective, that he was just trying to preserve what they had already passed down to him. Because, that's the way it was done, especially in China before printing was a widespread thing. It was very easy for one copy of a book or a set of lessons to get lost. So the apprentices of people who learned a thing would also write that information down and pass it down. So there would be more copies and less chance of it getting lost. Bit of a tangent there. But what I'm trying to say is, in a very conservative culture, this kind of writing down, codifying, systematizing the lessons you have learned is very important, but it's not meant to be restrictive most of the time. Whenever you write anything down as a way to do things, some people are going to try and browbeat you with it. That's not what Araki is doing here. He is trying to share, again, the problems he's had and how he's overcome them, in the hopes that people benefit from this. And he actually talks a little bit about one of the big influences on him was a book that he read, which was an interview between the French New Wave director Francois Truffaut, I don't know if I said that right, who interviewed Alfred Hitchcock. And he says it's basically a textbook on filmmaking, but he took a lot of lessons from it. He learned all kinds of things from it. And he's trying to write a similar book specifically for people aspiring to manga. And a lot of what he says here is probably going to apply to anyone trying to do visual sequential art storytelling. And just in the introduction already, there are some great gems. He says the worst thing for an aspiring mangaka is not knowing what kind of manga you want to create. And then later, what should I be making? That's the one question that absolutely should not be asked. So what he's saying is, if you can't clearly articulate what you're making, you need to be able to do that, and you should not leave it to other people to tell you what you're making. You're going to have muddled work like that. Yeah, and he talks a lot about his most famous work, which is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, but he does have others. The chapter 1 is just getting started. Yeah. And he talks a lot about making a huge impression, and he talks about how his art style imitated another manga called Babel 2, only he wasn't good. So he's pretty sure now, looking back on it, a lot of his early submissions felt very cookie cutter. They didn't stand out. And editors of his time and probably into the modern era, they didn't pull their punches. They could be very harsh. He talks about, the title of this section is "Return to the Envelope Unread." He talks about how editors would pull a manuscript out, look at the first page, and put it away because the first page just didn't cut it. So he talks then, like, he has, what is it? Yeah, 4 whole pages on making your first page. And I love what he does here. He doesn't delve deep into theory of a compelling first page. He says, read a lot of good selling stuff and make a list of what works. So, find a compelling title. He just lists a bunch of titles that he's really fond of here. And then, creating the first page, what makes good dialogue. And then he lists all these things that he thinks are great dialogue. Shocking dialogue, mellow, calming dialogue, comforting dialogue, sad dialogue, angry dialogue, joking dialogue, dialects, dialogue in haiku, dialogue in rhymes, and on and on. He ends each of these lists with many others. And he finally talks about the 5 W's and 1 H. He says the first panel should illustrate who is doing what, when and where, and why and how. And then he actually has concrete examples pulled from his first published work, and he breaks it all down. So again, this is a how-to. This is not deep art theory. This is really solid, really concrete steps to take. And I have not found a single bad idea in here. Offer many pieces of information simultaneously. Seize unclaimed territory. Things like that. So yeah. Again, this book is great, and it really sells itself here in the first chapter, talking about the importance of setting yourself apart from the very beginning. So again, Araki is very good, and you might think it's been years, decades even, since he's had to think about guaranteeing he keeps his reader after the first page. His name alone is probably enough to guarantee that most editors still think about will want to read his whole thing before they decide whether they're going to accept it or reject it. But he still thinks about these things, and you can tell just by all these examples he has on hand, the things he thinks about, the things he puts in place in his manuscripts, grabbing the reader from the first moment. Incredibly important. That's just the first chapter. Really good stuff. So if you are looking to write or draw, either one, comics in any way, shape, or form, I think this book is an invaluable resource, especially as you get into the later chapters where he talks about the basic structure and building characters and building your story. It's great stuff. And I'm looking forward to finishing this book. And I'm going to go through once a week and cover a chapter. So hopefully you will come back for chapter 2 next week. Thanks. If you enjoyed that, there is a like button and a subscribe button down below. Use them as you see fit. Comment in the comment box. Let me know what you thought if you have read this. If you haven't, let me know if you're going to, or if you're not going to, why you're not going to, because honestly, everybody could benefit from that book if storytelling is your jam. That's all I got for now. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you later.